Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. This is Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, a show for seekers of authentic information on Africa past and present. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, an African history scholar with years of study in the bag. For more information on Africa's history and geopolitics, subscribe to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge on YouTube. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Yes, welcome again to Africa News Review, episode 2. Today again, as always, I'm joined by a very special guest, Brother Milton Allimadi, who is a journalist, a publisher with Black Star News, author of How the West Demonizes Africa in the Media. And again, we're going to look at headlines in the Western press and give our take, an Afrocentric take on what has happened to said headlines. And so again, my name is Adesoji Iginla, and welcome. And we should. You want to say a few words, Brother Milton?
Oh, no, it's all good. We have a lot to discuss ahead of us. A lot of things going on around the world that impact on African communities. So I'm always happy to have this opportunity.
Fantastic.
With you and the brothers and sisters.
Yes, yeah. In the spirit of Brother Walter Rodney, yes, the Groundings, yes. Okay, so the first story is that of the UK Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who says the UK wealth isn't from white privilege and colonialism. Mm-hmm. And she made this statement at a London conference, highlighting the fact that the glorious revolution of 1688 paved way for economic certainty as opposed to any other narrative there is. Addressing financial services bosses at the City's UK International Conference in London, the business secretary said the UK's past exploitation and oppression of other countries and groups of people could not sufficiently explain the country's economic trajectory. I would add, she said, it worries me when I hear people talk about wealth and success in the UK as being down to colonialism or imperialism or wealth privilege or whatever. End quote. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, to begin things before I dive a little bit deeper, what is your initial take with regards to that assertion?
Well, I feel sad for her because she's one of many of people of Africa, whether she sees herself as an African or not, of African ancestry, who are compelled to debase themselves in order to, climb to some level of attainment or achievement. So she's in the government, so that presumptuously she's a member of the Conservative Party.
She's a member of Parliament.
And Conservative Party,
yes,
correct?
She is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't know that, but I know right now the Conservatives are in power, so that a person of African ancestry who's a minister would also have to be a member of the Conservative Party. So,
correct.
It's very sad that you have to have a certain type of mentality to be a member of the Conservative Party and then to climb the political hierarchy as well. Because obviously, the victims of British genocide are still paying the price up today in the 21st century, including her very close relatives. She's very African.
Yep.
She can trace close relatives to African regions, African countries, I'm very sure. And so she's literally mocking their disempowerment, their impoverishment by making that kind of assessment. But obviously, she realizes that there's a premium that she commands. Number one, as a person of African ancestry, number one. Number two, as a woman. Because obviously, the world has been and it still is dominated by Europeans all over the world, whether it's a European, European-American, Europeans have dominated the world. So there's always, in the name of quote-unquote diversifying opportunities for people of African ancestry and people and women as well to be promoted. And the sad thing is that in order for them to be promoted, which is something, of course, which is an issue of justice and needs to be done, they make them really make a pact with the devil, debase themselves. Obviously, she cannot be that ignorant. I'm not willing to believe that she's that ignorant. So she's saying things she does not believe. Britain, of course, was one of the first countries to industrialize, not because it wrote, phenomenal papers or passed bills in the parliament to introduce new laws, how to separate the power of the monarch with parliament and give power and rights to the people, and the media establishment. All those were important aspects, but those largely are superseded by primitive accumulation. Primitive accumulation is the reason why Britain was able to industrialize, one of the first countries in the world to industrialize. The steam engine would have been worth nothing had resources not been plundered from other parts of the world, whether by outright theft of silver, gold from the Americas, whether through enslavement, exploitation of African labor, African resources. It allowed Britain to industrialize and start mass production in factories. So in fact, Britain directly owes a good part of its wealth to the exploitation of Africans, whether the Africans were exploited from the African continent or exploited in other parts of the world where they had been taken. So that, of course, is nonsense, and she knows it's nonsense, but I understand why she's saying that. Remember the Conservative Party? She's a minister in a conservative government. If I was willing to sell my soul to the devil in order to be promoted in the political hierarchy, I would do exactly the same thing that she's doing. So that would be my response to her. And in fact, I would give her the best evidence. Britain is no longer Great Britain because Britain is no longer an imperial power like it was when it was Great Britain. So in fact, that is the best evidence. And the best proof is that Britain is no longer exploiting to the extent that it was exploiting at its imperial glory. And that's when it was really at its might, politically and economically. It's no longer there. In fact, it's to show that, because she's implying that there's some sort of unique intelligence that the Europeans or Britain used to get to that level. That is nonsense.
Yeah, correct.
The Chinese are not conducting the kind of primitive accumulation that Britain benefited from. And where is Britain today compared to China? Britain is a little banana republic compared to China, So that also refutes her implication that there's some special European intelligence that allowed for that. So on both levels, she does not have any strong argument.
I don't think she does. There's a book out there titled "Silencing the Past," where the book was written by Roger Trujillo, the Haitian historian, who said professional historians must assert themselves and be in the center of the narrative. Otherwise, what will end up happening is politicians and magnates like Ms. Badenoch here will try to rewrite the narrative. If you notice, just like on your side of the pond, there is this anti-intellectualism. On here, we have a similar type thing. They call it the woke mob. We're going after the woke mob. How dare you attack our sense of self? So the notion that someone is challenging their version of history is repugnant, is intellectually repugnant to them. But you and I know that the story, you just need to push it up back a little bit. It's all a facade. It's all a facade. If she is saying that it's not down to colonialism and imperialism, I wonder what she will make of Eric Williams's book, Capitalism and Slavery, where he says in chapter 5, British industry and the triangular trade. It says the investment, even the first blob there says the investment of profits from the triangular trade into banking and industry. I mean, you begin to ask the question. He
doesn't just say it. You know, he uses their own facts and statistics from the British Archives and from the British Parliament.
Correct.
Members of the royal family were beneficiaries. And they had shares in these companies that were profiting from enslavement. That is one of my favorite books.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And also there's another one, if she cares to read it. I mean, in 1807, the Parliament did outlaw slave trade in the British Empire. But funny enough, for the next 25 years, more than 700,000 people still remain enslaved. Why? Because the what's it called? The Brits, the establishment, were awaiting compensation, written by Michael Taylor, and it's all documented in here. So you begin to wonder, what is the take? Is someone for some reason thinking I need to change the narrative to suit a certain agenda?
Yeah,
because
it's like pushing a boulder up a mountain, and it's a losing proposition because the world is transforming. There's some things that cannot be stopped. Countries like China are emerging, and then after China, at some point, Africa will also emerge. The only thing that's holding back Africa is that not having the cohesiveness that China has right now. Africa right now is comparable to China when they had the feudal monarchs, when China was really very divided with all these princes and emperors and kings ruling different parts of China. But look at what China has accomplished just in the last 60 years alone. You know, I remind people all the time, at the 1960, the per capita income of China was $98. This is World Bank stats. And in the same year, the same statistic from the same organization showed for Ghana. Ghana was almost double that of China. It was almost $200 per capita. And look at where China is today. China is today a global power. So the world is changing, and nothing can stop that. You see, it's not being stopped really in Africa. It's being slowed down. It's being slowed down by supporting reactionary rulers in African countries that promote the interests of the West. But even that is changing now. Those are being forced out, and the African youth will have their say. And once we have cohesive governments, they have regional governments, eventually leading toward an Pan-African government, that is when the continent will really tap into its resources and build wealth and prosperity. And once that happens, it won't take more than 2 decades, really, for Africa
to be transformed
into a superpower.
Yeah, just a generation. Just a generation.
You know, I don't
That's
take
all
people
it
like
needs.
this British minister that seriously. It's just, you know, one of those annoyances. They get major media coverage, but obviously we need to respond to the calumny.
Of course.
But remind her and let people know that this is self-debasement at its best. You know?
And also, maybe she needs to speak to her conservative colleague here, Tory MP for slaveholder family set to gain $3 million from the sale of former plantation.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, this, if you need more evidence, if you need evidence as to what's the possible reason for where you are or where the country is, you need look no further than this, the history of this MP here. You know, clearly says the move has angered many Barbadians, especially those who says the Drax family played a pivotal role in the development of slavery-based sugar production. and the Barbados Slave Code in the 17th century. This denied Africans basic human rights, including the right to life. So, like you said, maybe we've given her too much leeway in terms of thinking. And so, in leaving the shores of the United Kingdom and going over to the other side of the pond, the United States is again in the news, this time on a geopolitical trajectory, which is
But before we get there,
essentially...
I did want to say something about Richard Drake's situation in Barbados, where you have this, the descendant of a former owner of
enslaved
a plantation for enslaved Africans being paid several $1 million for the purchase of about 50 acres, which is, I think, is 21 hectares of land that he inherited from his enslaving ancestors. And the land, Prime Minister Martley says they needed to develop housing for the people of Barbados. So they need to purchase from him, because obviously they know the consequences of just expropriating land, even land that was stolen from land that used to be plantations and people were enslaved. She knows the consequences of expropriating without compensation. She has seen what happened to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was brought to its knees after they seized the land and returned it to Africans when Robert Mugabe was president. And up to date, Zimbabwe's economy is still reeling and yet to recover from the sanctions that were placed against Zimbabwe. And in fact, at the end of the day, the only reason why the sanctions were relieved because Zimbabwe has agreed to do exactly what Barbados is being made to do. Zimbabwe has agreed to take out loans of up to $3 billion to compensate the descendants of the Europeans who seized the land from the descendants of the Africans who are deprived today in the 19th century, and to use that money to compensate the descendants of the Europeans. So she does not want to be put in that similar predicament, and that is the reason why she's doing that, which of course is appalling. But that's the challenges we face so long as we remain divided politically as Pan-African people. So I just wanted to say that quickly, but we can move on.
I mean, I'll even to buttress your point, there are a couple of major cities in the UK, and whose very existence till today owes their very success to the transatlantic slave trade. I'll just mention a couple of them.
Birmingham included, right?
Which is, Birmingham actually is notorious for having supplied all the irons for the ships, the shackles, the muzzles, the chains. That was Birmingham's contribution. Liverpool was the refueling station. Bristol, the very existence of Bristol today was actually built on the back of the transatlantic, the entire city. And it owes all its benevolence it owes its very existence to the benevolence of one slave trader, Edward Colston, whose statue was tossed in the river in June of 2020 during the post George Floyd demonstration. So again, I mean, then London. We come to London. London is the financial capital, not just of the world, but also the insurance capital of the entire transatlantic slave trade by Lloyd's of London. And Lloyd's of London, if you go on their website, it's there, black and blue, our history. We're not proud of it. We're trying to make amends. And yet, you have a minister who's trying to rewrite history. And so that is just an aspect of what we need to speak to.
Right. And in addition to the book you suggested, I would also suggest that people read the book that you're very, very familiar with as well, which, of course, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, which also has a section which breaks down the French and the British companies that also prospered and benefited from the enslavement of Africans.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Even the favorite hymn of the country, Rule Britannia. The opening line there is Rule Britannia, because we'll never be slaves. So who should be slaves? I mean, it's there. The entire...
Maybe they spoke too soon, about never being slaves. The world is changing dramatically.
So the entire narrative of the country, is, it's wrapped in it. Anyway, so we go on to the next story, which is that of the United States withdrawing from Niger.
Yes.
And I will share my wait a second. I will share my screen. So apparently this is now the order of the day. U.S. to withdraw from Niger after security pact fails in strategic victory from Russia. There's a deep problem with that headline, but I'll allow you have first dibs. The opening line is the U.S. will withdraw more than 1,000 military personnel from Niger in a move that will force the Biden administration to rethink its counterterrorism strategy and amount to a strategic victory from Russia. The decision comes a month after the West African country ruling military junta revoked a security pact with Washington that had allowed American forces on its soil to help fight jihadist terrorism.
Right.
Over to you.
Okay, Ralph. There are many elements here that need to be deconstructed that have, which is typical, of course. The narrative is always upside down. So you're talking about Niger. But the critical issues here are who has gained. Is it the United States or is it Russia? And in this case, obviously, they're saying it's Russia. Now, can you find a story referring some major occurrence in the United States in an African newspaper where the headline would be who has gained, which African country has gained as a result of this major occurrence in the United States?
I see what you're doing there.
Absolutely. African agency is non-existent. But in a way, it's good because it makes us confront the realities that face us. And that's how you deal with situations when they're not exposed, they're not that glaring and clear. You never have the opportunity to deal with it. So as far as you count, you're a continent of 1.3 billion people, a continent that has the abundant supply of the world's natural resources and arable land and water and sunlight. And yet you're so helpless that when the one nation, which is Niger, decides to exert its sovereignty and ask for the removal of 1,000 American troops, why might this be beneficial to Niger? Yeah. That is not the issue. The story is this is not good for the United States and the United States agenda in terms of fighting quote-unquote jihadists. And as a result, Russia benefits by becoming the new, we could say, 21st century imperial power in Niger instead of the United States. So I say this because I want us as African people to see where we still stand today after so-called 60 years of Uhuru.
Independence.
Yes, Uhuru, of course, is the Israeli word for independent. Takes me back to the book by the father of Raila Odinga, who was Jaramogi Odinga Oginga. And the title of the book was brilliantly selected, which said, "Not Yet Uhuru." Describes African countries today in the 21st century. They're not yet Uhuru. First of all, are the jihadists a threat to Niger? And if they are a threat to Niger, why cannot the Niger military deal with that threat?
Deal with them.
Why cannot the Niger military, with its alliances, the regional countries, deal with it? Why cannot the African Union collectively deal with it if it's a threat to one member of the African Union country? These are all the issues that come to the fore. So, of course, and then, of course, the other question is, why has it taken such a long time for the United States, which is supposed to have advanced military, advanced weapons, and France was there as well with thousands of soldiers until they were expelled last year? Why have they not succeeded in dealing with this so-called military threat by the jihadists? Is that really possible, that the jihadists are militarily capable of withstanding all these powers? Or are there other issues underlying why there's not any really serious resolve in dealing with this, the military? And it's not to say that they're not causing military destruction. We've seen people being displaced, we've seen people being killed. But really, have they been confronted militarily with the type of determination needed to really to destroy them? So all these issues come to the fore because, as we know, there has been for a long time an attempt to expand the U.S. Africa Command on the African continent. And of course, no African country had been willing to accommodate the U.S. Africa Command, and that is why it was located in Germany. You see, I remember when Liberia was willing or had started some talk with the United States about accommodating and giving the headquarters in Liberia. I think it was Nigeria that said, no, that won't happen. Otherwise, you pay the price for it. So if African countries are willing to go to that extent, you can understand that there's been an effort by the United States to really expand Africa on the African continent. And of course, not for the benefit of Africa. It's primarily been for to countercheck
the
China.
United States.
To countercheck China. But now, more recently, because of the way relations
Russia has got into
deteriorated.
The mix.
Exactly. Russia's in the mix. So now it's to counter Russia as well as China's expansion in Africa. So that's how I see. So obviously, when it's a blow like that, it's not a blow in the sense that it will diminish the fight against the jihadists, right? It's a blow in the sense that it will diminish the U.S. Agenda to counter China and Russia in Africa.
Russia.
So we have to learn as African people to read between the lines also. We can't just read headlines. Verbatim.
I would also add this. There was a piece that was released by Black Alliance for Peace and U.S. Out of Africa. I think it was in February that I read that piece. At that time, it didn't make sense because, when you read something offhand, but there's no dot to connect it to, then you begin. At that time, the United States had agreed with Ghana, Benin Republic, and Cote d'Ivoire to have new drone sites in those three countries. At that time, I didn't get it. It was like, because there were protests in the streets of Ghana against the siting of such a facility. But it all went quiet all of a sudden. But once they put it out in the public domain, they're essentially trying to manufacture consent. And once they see how people push up against it, then if the government is comfortable enough, it will move forward. If not, So nothing else came of it. So with the removal now of the site in Agadez, otherwise called Area 101 in Niger, it then begins to paint this narrative that a tapestry was being built. Now, what happened is the removal of them from there, from Niger, creates a black spot. Now, in that piece written by Black African Alliance for Peace, which if you go on their website, I think it's blackallianceforpeace.com. You can read the piece in there. It's in English and French. They made it known that the presence of that the drone base in Niger, has actually caused deaths, African deaths, in their thousands. In not just Niger, but places as far as Somalia, which is on the other side. So now imagine, with the recent military juntas in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and now Niger, and the sighting of drone sites in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Benin Republic. Benin Republic just next to Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana literally underneath Mali and Burkina Faso. Can you see what kinds of danger the very existence in that neighborhood is going to cause to that region?
Well, to me, the physical sighting, yes, is one aspect of it, but they also, have all these carrier ships, They have these massive ships that they don't even need these physical locations in African countries. When they have their ships lined up on both the Indian Ocean side and the Atlantic Ocean side, it just delays things by a few hours sometimes in terms of deployment. It's easier to have the physical, because when you have the physical, it means you're also interacting with the host government's military, the host government's government, right? The government officials.
Yeah, correct.
And that is where the danger really comes from. But in terms of presenting a physical danger to Africans, that is always going to be there, whether they're physically located on the soil or not. Look at Somalia right now. In Somalia, they're still having many drone hits, and many times they've been reported that there were so-called mistakes, and civilians have been killed. And these drones are not being launched by American troops deployed on the land in Somalia. These are all coming from carrier ships, aircraft carrier ships, which are on the Atlantic Ocean line. But to me, the bigger story is, once again, this is another example of the failure of African countries to exercise sovereignty and control. And unless you do that basic thing to control, to have sovereignty, you cannot even talk about economic development, really, in any African country when you don't have sovereignty, right? How is it that we still have, in the 21st century, about 80 U.S. Either bases or garrisons or camps in African countries, in the 21st century?
As a sad development.
Absolutely. So what does Uhuru really mean? You kicked out the British. You are just in the process of kicking out, the French.
The French.
And then it turns out that the United States.
The Americans are very much
are deployed, all over the continent. How many military bases does the United States or Britain or France have in China? It's not there. And
they can't even move a boat. They can't even move a boat near them.
Absolutely. So there's not a coincidence that China does not have any of these imperialist military bases, and China is today economic, global economic and military and political power. There are correlations between all these issues. Controlling sovereignty. You can't control sovereignty when you have imperialist military deployed in your country. In order to decide how you use your resources, you have to have sovereignty. So it's almost like a cycle or fused objectives. In order to have economic development, you need to have sovereignty over political decisions. In fact, in his book on Black Africa and economic development, Check Out Job, I'm sure it's a book that you have, the one with the brown cover, said the problem is that we've been trying to put the cart before the horse. That's why all these attempts at regional economic pacts to grow those into a Pan-African union, economic union, is not going to happen until we have leaders who are willing to cede some power. But everybody wants to be a president. Everybody wants to be a prime minister, So you cannot implement these policies if you don't have the executive power to make those decisions. And you can't have the executive power if, like today, we have, 54, top decision makers. It won't happen. Yeah. So we are looking at the symptoms of the bigger disease, which is the lack of power, to exercise sovereignty in Africa.
Some would argue that, I would even argue that there wouldn't have been a need for them citing a drone base in Niger, were it not for the toppling in 2011 of Muammar Gaddafi.
Absolutely.
Most of the problems that you're now ascribing to said place was non-existent. Mm-hmm. So you create a problem only to then find a solution to it. Or provide a solution.
They were not creating. Yeah, you're right. They were actually creating not what they consider a problem to us perhaps, but to them that was actually the solution to how to deal with Colonel Gaddafi. Because these are not unintelligent people. Meaning they assessed that should you invade, these are the possible consequences. They must have been mapped out already. So to them,
correct,
the destruction of that part of the African region and the unleashing of so much violence was one of the acceptable consequences to the NATO invasion of Libya, destroying of the government, and dispersing all those weapons that are now all over North and West Africa, even all the way to Central Africa. Those weapons are being used.
Yeah, which is...
I agree with you.
And
of course, Gaddafi presented to them an existential threat in the sense that he was actually trying to implement the vision of African
United
unity.
Africa.
Absolutely. That Kwame Nkrumah had envisioned in 1963.
Only for him to pay the ultimate price. And,
of course, as always.
Okay. Thank you for that. We'll go on to the next story, which is the cultural artifacts. And this will make interesting reading. Give me a second. Let me share this. And it's to do with the fact that the British Museum is currently under investigation over Ethiopian artifacts hidden from view for over 150 years. Some will say, well, if you didn't know it existed, why are they being investigated? But it follows on the fact that the Information Workshop is investigating the British Museum over claims that it has been overtly secretive about some of the sensitive items in its collection. A group of sacred Ethiopian altar tablets that have been hidden from view at this museum for more than 150 years. The artifacts include 11 wood and stone tablets, which the museum acknowledges were looted. At least they're using the right word. Were looted by British soldiers after the Battle of Magdala in 1868 and has never been on public display and are considered to be so sacred that even the institution's own curators and trustees are forbidden from examining them. Now, here is the problem I find with that. Before I hand it over to you.
Yes.
There are two things here, really. One is the fact that if you don't know you have the artifacts, how does one go about claiming what is rightfully theirs? So, which is a double-edged sword for the British establishment and also for those who are seeking return of said artifacts. So what do you make of this?
Well, this is clearly an inside job. And it can easily be investigated because, first of all, if it was a buyer, right, a person that just buys antiquities online, who was able to detect that no, this thing must have been stolen, and then it's being sold on online, whether eBay or where have you. The people or person, and it can't be a person if they're talking about almost 2,000 missing items. Yep. One individual cannot be behind this type of mass theft. So it means the people who are selling it, having stolen it, know that they are not cataloged. Right?
Yep.
And there are very few people who know the items that are not cataloged. So given how proud they are of their institutions, Scotland Yard and what have you, this is it's a joke if they say that this cannot be easily investigated and the people that are behind it brought to account and all the items recovered. They can easily recover all these items. They're so unique that you can't hoard it. You can't resell it. People would know. People that buy these things know that this is highly sophisticated.
They're mostly going to go into private collections.
Absolutely. And many have been recovered in the recent years from private collection. But what to me is most interesting is this, because I've taken a serious interest in these African artifacts that are in museums all over the world, particularly in the United States, in France, and in Britain, and in Germany. A few years ago,
you were saying?
Okay. I read an item in The Guardian, and it was about the British Museum in negotiations with Ethiopia to loan some of the items stolen after the Battle of Magdala, where in fact there's a big story going on there. I don't believe for a minute that the Emperor Tewodros committed suicide, and then conveniently they found him dead.
Do you care to expand on that for those who?
Oh no, I mean, why
would be watching this?
Why would an Ethiopian emperor willing to fight against the British Imperial Army suddenly commit suicide and allow his wife and his son to be kidnapped by the Imperial invading army? That does not make sense to me. And one of the things he's known for, Emperor Tewodros, is his bravery. Because at that time, there were many emperors, regional emperors, and then always one would emerge as king of kings, right? And this would come after suppressing or subduing the rival emperor. It was very competitive, right?
Yeah.
You would fight for a long time, and he emerged as the king of kings, Tewodros. And now suddenly you are committing suicide and allowing your wife and son to be kidnapped, and the wife obviously it's too convenient for me. I've never bought that story. That is a dissertation waiting to be written by an Ethiopian scholar, So number one. And by the way, the wife never made it alive to the coast, where they then sailed back to Britain or to India. They brought some of the soldiers from India, British Imperial in India. The wife was killed somehow or conveniently died along the way, probably molested or what have you. The son Allimadi was 7 years old. So he was kidnapped and brought to Britain, where he was supposedly, partially raised by Queen Victoria. And the son begged to be sent back
to return
to his home. He was never sent back. The son died in England. I think he was around 18 years old or so in 1879. And they said he is buried in the UK. Ethiopians have demanded for years that his remains be returned.
Yeah.
If they knew where the remains were, why would they refuse this request? It doesn't make sense to me. I think they don't know where this boy's remains really are.
Mm.
But the most interesting part about the ongoing theft of these items is that it came at that time when Ethiopia was really making strong demands that they be returned. And then Britain had negotiated an agreement where they would loan, check it out, they would loan these stolen items back to Ethiopia, provided Ethiopia.
That's a recurring word, but I'll allow you finish the loan bit. There's another loan in the
signed an agreement to return it after a few years. So there's a lot going on in this whole mess that can be investigated and exposed. And I think very prominent people involved in running this museum will be exposed if, in fact, it's not suppressed and it's investigated. Because, Britain also has a reputation. If it appears investigation may go too high up, suddenly it's ended and it's suppressed, and that's the end of the story. Yeah, so those are my comments on this matter.
Okay, so speaking to the loaning of cultural artifacts, initially the British Museum also talked about loaning the Benin bronzes to the Nigerian government, but then that was checkmated by the former President Buhari, in the sense that he then signed a government edict stating that the British should deal with the Benin Kingdom itself, not the Nigerian state.
Interesting.
Because that had been the way the British had been able to circumvent the idea of returning the artifacts. It's like, if Nigeria guarantees their return, then we'll give it to you. Bearing in mind, the Nigerian Museum itself was only founded in 1956. The expedition happened in 1896. And so what you then have is they've been doing that back and forth, but with Buhari now signing the fact that you deal directly with the Benin Kingdom meant the British had no hiding space. They now had to, okay, we're going to have to deal with them. Oh, no, we're not building anything. You return the artifacts in their true state.
Right.
Another country that is... Sorry?
I've always supported the position that there should be a Pan-African museum in where the headquarters of the African Union is, which is, of course, Addis Ababa in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
And each African country should subscribe toward paying for the maintenance of this world-class museum, so that now you have these issues of, there's also some argument that some of the countries don't have the economic resources to maintain these artifacts in the kind of preserved conditions and rooms they need to be maintained. So now there's no excuse, because you have a world-class African museum, and the artifacts, whatever country it was stolen from, they should all be sent to this Pan-African Museum in Addis Ababa. And the guests who are now going to the Met,
the museums,
going to museum in London, the British Museum, going to Germany or going to France, now they would be coming to Addis Ababa, and the revenue from the museum visits would be shared amongst these African countries based on their subscription to maintaining
to the museum.
I think this is a Pan-African idea that needs to be supported.
I mean, the Ashantis are also having a loan from the British Museum, and it's been subject of many discussion in so many online forums.
Take it. They should accept it. I would accept a loan, and I'll take it, and I'll just never return it. Now, if you stole my wallet and you agreed to lend it,
which is what most people,
and you agreed to lend it back to me, I'll welcome it. I say, yeah, sure, and that would be the end of it. So yeah, take it.
Which is what I mean. Which is the point everybody is actually saying. It's like, that one, and that one. I'll accept it. Don't worry. And then, can we have it back? Have what back? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean,
then when the time to return, then arrives, then you won't be able to find them for some reason. Yeah, so you play the same game that they're playing.
Of course. I mean, if they can, it's akin to someone robbing your home and then saying the only way I can return your stolen items to you is if you agree to give it back to me. If you have it for a couple of days.
No, but it says a lot in terms of the level of contempt that they have for African people. It really does. It speaks very loudly.
Yeah. That they can actually do this openly.
Say it openly. And say, let's write the agreement.
Openly.
And sign the agreement. And why not? I mean, we have to be very harsh on our leadership. We've allowed ourselves to be in that weakened condition. To me, any manifestation of the humiliation of Africa is a good reason to motivate our people to rise up against our external as well as domestic oppressors. I don't distinguish the two. The bad, corrupt African leader is an extension of the bad European who wants to exploit Africa. They're one and the same. It's a partnership of exploitation.
I mean, you remember the video, which probably goes back to the story we did earlier on Niger's, the U.S. drones situation, where Nana Akufo was sitting with Anthony Blinken, and he was talking about, spying on his northern neighbors. Mali. I mean, that is shocking.
Yeah, it's only shocking in the sense that it was being said publicly like that, but it's what they do all the time. You saw that video.
But imagine
WikiLeaks memo that came out, showing how General Museveni in Uganda, the military dictator, whom many of us knew was a CIA asset anyway, was openly selling off Gaddafi while pretending to be Gaddafi's friend. Gaddafi pumped billions of dollars into Uganda's economy when during Museveni.
Idi Amin.
No, during Museveni's reign as well. Idi Amin did not even get as much from Gaddafi as Museveni did. But at the same time, Museveni was providing intelligence about Gaddafi to the United States, and even asking for the United States to protect him when his plane is flying to Europe and then to the United States and crossing Libyan airspace because he's afraid that Gaddafi might one day shoot his plane down. No, it's on WikiLeaks, so anybody can Google WikiLeaks. Museveni asked for U.S. help against Gaddafi. At the time, they were supposed to be friends, and they were hugging.
That's
whenever
deep.
It's on WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, exposed that. That to me is the highest level of betrayer, African traitor. So it happens all the time. It's rarely do we get the evidence emerging, which is of course very sad.
I mean, there's been what's it called? There's been history of leaders, what's the word? backstabbing other leaders. But the mere fact that you have it documented as you said,
right.
it's shocking. It's shocking. I mean, Houphouët Boigny was material to the assassination of Thomas Sankara.
Absolutely.
Who else can we say was so man, but that is shocking. So our final story is health related, or there are two of them actually. So let's start with capital, as you normally would say.
Right.
And it's Rio Tinto, the Australian mining giant, is may face, the headline says, Rio Tinto's Madagascar's mine may face lawsuit over pollution claims.
Yes.
And the lead is mining company hits with accusation it contaminated waterways with harmful level of uranium and lead. But for me, the standout part is Rio Tinto now is likely to be sued in an English court, but on behalf of people living in villages near a mine in Madagascar. Why do you think it is important that it's done in the UK as opposed to Madagascar itself?
Okay, to me, and I hope, to me, it's because of probably the cost of suing against a company like that. A company like that has very deep pockets, deploys the most expensive law firms in the world to defend them. So there are few African law firms that would be able to really
handle such a case.
Absolutely. So I think that is the primary reason. Maybe you have a few law firms in South Africa. Maybe if they practice like that type of international law, you could find them in a country like South Africa. But very few African countries that would have huge firms of that level to be able to do the research, commit all the hours to get all those documents. It's very time consuming.
Discoveries. Yep.
Those lawsuits takes years. You're flying from one part of the world to the other. You're bringing in witnesses from here to there. You're accommodating those witnesses, paying for their expense while they're staying. Because the witnesses, of course, are going to be all over the world. Whatever the documents have been flying left and right.
Correct.
So I think that to me is the primary reason. And also perhaps another reason might be because of assets that a company like Rio Tinto would have in the United Kingdom. So that should you prevail,
in the event of compensation,
if you prevail and they're playing games, you could seize some of the assets in the United Kingdom. And so that to me would be another reason why.
Okay. That makes logical sense. The final one would be for those with a sweet tooth. It's Nestle, but this time they've gone after your children. Nestle apparently adds sugar to infant milk sold in poorer countries, reports finds. The lead is Swiss food firm infant formula and cereal sold in Global South ignores WHO anti-obesity guidelines for Europe, says Public Line. Their submission is Nestle, the world's largest consumer goods company, adds sugar and honey to infant milk and cereal products sold in many poorer countries, contrary to international guidelines aimed at preventing obesity and chronic diseases.
Right.
So,
not
there's one part that there's one part that stood out to me. Where is it? Yes. Obesity is increasingly a problem in low and medium income countries. In Africa, the number of overweight children under 5 has increased by nearly 23% since 2000. According to the World Health Organization, globally more than 1 billion people are living with obesity. It's not easy for consumers in any countries to tell whether a country whether a product contains added sugar and how much is present based on nutritional information printed on the packaging alone. That's even if the said packaging contains any information. So you are going to say.
Okay, very good. And in the United States, ironically, they pronounce it Nestle. So I don't know what the true pronunciation is. It's not even an American name. So, I'm sure you may actually have the right.
Nestle.
Yeah, it's funny. Here in the U.S., people just call it Nestle.
Nestle.
Yeah. But anyway, this company, Nestle, years ago, and people can look this up, was a big story for a long time. They were implicated in selling expired baby formula globally to so-called developing countries. So they have a reputation, This was the major scandal many, many years ago, in fact, decades ago. So as I said, it's nothing new. Apparently, they do whatever they can get away with. That one, I don't know how that whole issue was resolved, but it was a big international issue, right? So now, apparently, they're being caught again. And why are they doing this? Of course, once you get people dependent on sugar.
On sugar, yeah.
Now they become candidates for KFC, which is also expanding in Africa, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Burger King. So you have our young people now forsaking our African restaurants that sell roasted organic chicken, right?
Boiled foods.
Right? They may be, a little chewy, right? Ours, a little chewy, but very good tasting and much, much healthier. Now they're used to the fat thigh a chicken that is produced. It's a chick. And then 6 weeks later, it's already a pumped up fat chicken being sold as fast food. That has consequences. Whatever they're pumping into those products. And then, of course, they add the sweet flavor, and our young people are now addicted to that. So it's part of that whole industry of pushing, fast foods in Africa, in a country where these incidents of obesity were not as high, or heart diseases were not as prevalent, or diabetes not as prevalent some years ago, now very prevalent. Because they think, I've arrived. Because now I'm eating McDonald's and other Western fast foods,
But I mean, if we were to look forward, that is going to cause some serious financial and health implications for said countries.
Of course, without a doubt.
Because if they don't have the public health to deal with all these issues.
Precisely, and that's the major point. You don't have the public health, and when you have the public health system now, it's no longer subsidized because the World Bank tells your government, remove the subsidy, otherwise we will not release a loan to you. You're in a very tight spot, and everything is connected. The more knowledge we have, the more type of exposés that we have on, media shows such as this, your show, the more informed our people can become. Go back to eating. The thin-legged, chewy chicken is much, much healthier than the fat.
And boil your foods.
Yes.
Boil your foods. Cook from the ground. Cook from the ground up. Cook from the ground up. Know everything that goes into your pots. Yeah. My grandmother would say, if you don't know what it is you're eating, how are you sure you're not killing yourself?
Absolutely.
How are you sure?
Your granny knew what it was all about.
Yeah. Cook from the ground up. Most people can't. I mean, cooking is you taking care of yourself. That's even the first point.
Yeah. We need to also get some of the more conscious youth, in their music, in their visual productions, in the videos they produce, to highlight the good things that are African. Be creative. Show them why the indigenous organic African food not only is tastier but healthier than a Burger King or McDonald's. And the youth are very good in using these digital media. So let's try to start to recruit a couple of the conscious youth so they can communicate this knowledge.
Yes. And with that, we've come to the end of another episode of African News Review. And again, we thank Brother Milton
Always
for bringing his
Always my
insights and any last words?
As the late Samora used to say, Samora Machel, a luta continua.
Victory Asserting. Thank you very much. And thank you. And yes, from me, Adesoji Iginla, it's good evening and see you next week.
Thank you.
I hope you found this week's episode informative. Join us next week on Adesoji Speaks Knowledge as we continue to help you reframe the narrative about the African continent, past and present, by providing you with accurate information to give you a true and clearer picture of events as it pertains to Africa. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you.